Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all well. We're just going to leave it around 30 seconds or so before we start. So it's still just before 10 o'clock. So we'll be back with you in a very short time. Well, it's just turned 10 o'clock, so shall we make a start? Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this City Guilds Gas Delivery webinar. Hope you're all well and looking forward to this webinar. We're presenting this webinar from home, so please excuse any unwanted background noise and any potential delay in the slides. Today's host will be myself, David Pye, one of the technical advisors, along with Andy Derber from Blueflame Associates. Also on the screen there, you can see colleagues Salim Vizram and Rob Malander, along with the contact details. To get the most out of this webinar session, please see the control panel on the side of your screen. You'll see a questions tab where you can type in your questions. We'll probably aim to answer those at the end of the webinar. You'll also see a chat tab. So if you're having any issues with the platform or you can't hear us or anything like that, you can just put some chat in there. You'll also see a handout section, and in there you'll see a copy of this presentation. So please have a look in there and you can download that presentation. There will be a follow-up email, but it will come direct from the software and it will include a survey. So please take a few minutes just to complete that survey. It is really helpful to get your feedback. And it'll also include a copy of this recording. So the only thing it won't have is the handout. So if you can, at some stage throughout this webinar, please download that. So I think that's everything covered before we begin. So let's move on to the agenda. So the welcome introductions we've covered. So we're going to work through preparing for an EQA or IGEM audit, an overview of IQA, a few snips from gas work logs. Then Andy Derber from Blueflame Associates will take you through several stages and parts of the assessments. Then we'll cover some general updates that you may or may not be aware of. We're going to share some EPA contacts, so any centres looking to deliver endpoint assessment in gas, all the related plumbing and gas EPA, we'll give you the contacts to follow up with that. Some information on support material, and there's some new updates there. And then hopefully we'll have plenty of time to answer all your questions. So we'll have a Q&A session right at the end. So hopefully that's what you thought you signed up for, and let's get into some of the information. So the IGEM and audit checklist. So you should be hopefully familiar with this by now. So this is a document which is shared from your EQAs and with your EQAs and covers a lot of the information required, well, in fact, all the information required as part of those checks. Now I'm going to run a very quick poll. It'd be interesting to see how many of you have had an IGEM audit. So I'm going to just launch that now. So hopefully you can see that poll on screen. Please do use the chat and let me know if, oh, I can see people are answering, that's good. So I'll just give you a few more moments to answer that. Pretty split at the moment. So just leave it a few more seconds as people are still clicking away. I can see the numbers still changing. Okay, final chance, just click a button. So close. Share those results. So hopefully you can see on screen now those results. So 29% say yes, 45% say no, and 26% say don't know. That's typical, really. That's very similar to the results we've been getting in the live sessions that we've been running. as feedback from the delegates who could attend there. And really, this will help us understand of your awareness of the IGEM audit. Just give you a little bit of history, going back several years now. There was feedback and thoughts around gas assessment and the quality of the general delivery around it. So we all know that the quite in-depth assessment with gas, but there were questions from the industry over the training. So they wanted some type of audit or checks around the depth and the amount and the range of training that's delivered. And it's all linked to the managed learning programs and the matters of gas training documents. Now, what the auditors are required to do is either carry out direct audits with yourselves, or the likes of ourselves, City Guilds, we've become a recognizer of training. So that means we carry out this audit and then we are audited by IGEM. And we have to show them the results of all our audits to maintain that status. So this is preferable, I think, to the providers because you're not getting additional audits through IGEM. You are being audited, though, but through ourselves. Now, I suspect what's been happening is people haven't really twigged that there's actually two activities going ahead when you have an EQA visit. You see it as one activity, it's an EQA coming in, they're just asking some further questions now. But I think it's worth us all noticing that there's actually two separate activities happening. The first part of the activity is actually an audit of the training, nothing to do with assessment. And that is where this checklist comes in. So this will be shared with you prior to the visit. You can go through it, you'll know what's going to be checked, and you can put in your initial responses about where information is. Following that, when the EQA comes in, it'll just speed up that process a little bit. They'll have to see some of the documents and carry out the audit and refer to, make notes against what you've said you've got. So they'll have to report on it. And then that checklist and that audit is complete, they'll then continue with the normal EQA visit. And that is our evidence then when we're checked by IGEM. So hopefully that makes you understand the process, a bit of the background, and be aware now that it's not just an EQA visit you'll be having, it will be an IGEM audit through ourselves, and that is what this checklist is about. So it's very important, if we don't meet the requirements of this, it means that our qualifications aren't meeting the requirements that lead to gas safe and all those requirements. So we do need to make sure that this is happening and we're working through it. So there's just a snip of the document that hopefully you are familiar with or will become familiar with very soon. So it starts talking about learning specifications, prerequisites of training, outcomes of training delivery. So you can see it's all around training and delivery. This is one of the things that people do get mixed up with. Try not to confuse the two things. One is all training and one is around the assessment. Learner induction process, protocols, training methods. So it's things like schemes of work, PowerPoint, what textbooks you're referring to, your inductions, it's all those type of things. So hopefully that's been helpful. We'll move on to the high risk status of gas qualifications and good practice IQA. So this is really to help providers in preparing for EQA visits. So the actual visit around the assessment of gas. So there are several things you would look for, and I imagine many of you have done your IQA qualifications, or there may even be EQAs, and been involved in quality delivery will be familiar with a lot of this. So it may be that you look at this as a bit of a refresher, or it may be new to you and you've not seen it before. But regardless, I think it's really good to go through again. So there are factors that affect your IQA risk. Is it high risk, low risk, medium risk? We can, just for ease, we're going to assume sort of a traffic light approach to this sort of mini activity. So the amount of sampling that you carry out is dependent on many variables. So these are some of them on these post-its. So one, size and maturity and complexity of the centre. If you've got 3 staff and 20 learners all in one site, then that's not very complex. That's, you know, a typical small, medium-sized provider. Or you may be a very large provider who have many satellite centres. You may have 3 or 4 buildings, may be part of mergers, may have staff who work across different buildings, may have many different groups at different levels. That then becomes more complex. So that's high risk because you're more likely to make an error when it's more complex. So the risk goes up. Secondly, the numbers of learners and tutors and assessors and IQAs. Well, again, that's kind of linked to number 1. If you've got 3 or 4, it might be quite manageable with 1 IQA. You might have 10, 12, 15, many part-time staff. All of that just makes it a little bit more complex. The centre model, is it dispersed, centralised? Is it part of a consortium? So 1 college, all in 1 building, quite straightforward. But if it's dispersed across several sites, several centres, if it's part of a consortium or a group, do you have the same registration numbers, separate registration numbers? Again, it just pushes that risk up. The number and type of qualifications. So are you running the 9074, the 6014, the 9189? Are you still running some 6189? Do you run a separate ACS? Excuse me. So again, just makes it more complex, doesn't it? The more qualifications you have, the more likely it is there'll be an error made. So you need additional IQA to ensure that there's fewer errors. Number 5, the experience and confidence of assessors. Is it a brand new assessor or is it an assessor who's been delivering for many years and very experienced? One note on that though, one risk with experienced assessors, and I've fallen into this trap myself, is that you get used to delivering one way, you're doing it perfectly well, doing everything right. There are changes to the qualification. Sometimes experienced assessors are less likely to look at those changes because they're comfortable with their own delivery. And if you're not careful, there can be changes that you haven't witnessed or aren't aware of. Excuse me. So just because someone's experienced doesn't mean that you don't have to keep aware of the updates and the changes. Number 6, any changes to the qualifications? Well, we've seen that quite a lot recently, which again pushes the risk of these up. Number 7, the number of satellite centres or subcontractors. So are you outsourcing your gas to someone else? That increases the risk. Who's carrying out the IQA for that? Is it the centre you've outsourced it to or yourselves? If you've registered the learner, the EQA will see that when they come in and they will ask for that quality assurance against those learners. So whether it's you carrying it out or a satellite centre, you need evidence of the quality assurance. And number 8, problem unit areas and license to practice. Well, these are license to practice qualifications, therefore that risk is high anyway, it jumps it right up. So hopefully that's giving you an overview. Here's a type of sample plan. So you'll have your own centre-based ones. This is just one sample of a sample plan. So let's have a look at this then as a little activity. So if you've got a notepad, you can make a little note of what you consider these risks to be, or you may just keep a mental note of where you see these risks, and we'll work through these as one group. So centre A have new assessors to the centre, but they're experienced. So they're experienced at assessing, but haven't worked at your centre before. Would you consider that high, medium, low, low to medium? 2 brand new assessors who don't have their assessor qualifications. So brand new to assessing and not even qualified yet. So that's probably going to be high or red, isn't it, if we're using a traffic light system. The IQA is part-time. So they're not there to call upon when there's a problem. It may not be the day that they work. Do they carry out sampling only, or do they carry out all the other activities of an IQA? Learners are behind on assessment. Does that give us a risk? Is that a factor? Previous feedback from the EQA was to increase the amount of IQA and implement more sampling. So you've already got an action from your EQA to carry out more. There's no evidence of assessor inductions. So you've got new assessors and there's no documents to say they've been inducted, been shown what's in the qualification, what's expected of them, what standardization there is. And the practical assessment is completed at another site. So it's your learners, but they're not in the main college, they're out at another site. So if you're running a centre and it kind of looks like this, how would you see those risks? So this is just an example, and it's quite basic just for the purposes of this mini activity, but it hopefully give you an indication. We can see there a lot of those are naturally red. No evidence of assessor inductions. I've put amber. They should be done. It could be that they have been done, but there's no evidence of them. They're not been documented, in which case it's still a risk. You need to see it documented. But in that case, I've come with amber. Now, because all the vast majority are red, I've come up with an overall risk of red, which will lead to a high amount of IQA activity. That's predominantly sampling, but it's also observations of assessors, additional standardization meetings, and so on. So, Centre B, 2 assessors who are experienced in gas, 1 assessor experienced but new to gas assessing. They've previously used an external centre, but they're now using the Blueflame City Guilds qualification assessments in centre. So where does that leave those staff who were experienced at delivering gas, but they've not used this paperwork before or been part of this process? No issues raised from previous year's IQA or EQA sampling. Observations of assessors carrying out assessments were completed with no issues raised. The centre have their own assessment area and centre have no previous issues. So just at a glance, you're feeling a bit more comfortable because a lot of the things in place seem to be working quite well. So in this instance, I've gone green, amber. I've gone red on the ACS, and that's because those assessors and tutors are used to delivering with different requirements and different assessments. And what we've found is staff who come over from delivering ACS who don't adapt to the paperwork can make errors if they're not careful. It's not that they're not experienced or don't know the job. It's just getting an understanding of the slight subtle differences in delivery of an off-qual qualification as opposed to an ACS certificate. No issues raised from previous years IQA or EQA sampling, green. I put an asterisk there because although there's been no issues raised, it doesn't mean that issues haven't happened since, and it doesn't mean that the EQA didn't miss something because they're carrying out sampling and there may be things that they didn't see on that particular sample. So we can't just relax and say, well, everything was fine last year, so we don't have to make any changes. Again, from my experience, when I did work as an EQA, I've been out to some brilliant centres with excellent paperwork and they've had a glowing EQA report. Quite often the year after then you see some slippage really where you get a bit complacent, and then sort of 3 years later on the same staff and it's nowhere near as much documentation or assurances as you had a few years before. So it's just a warning really to be careful about complacency. Observation of assessors carrying out assessments were completed with no issues raised, green. So in this one I've gone for amber overall. It's going to be very difficult with gas to ever sort of be green and low risk because it's licensed to practice, and that in itself is a high risk area. So I think the best you would probably ever come up with would be amber, but there's so many variables. So how would that look actually on a sample plan? So again, this is just an example. What I'm suggesting here, and debate this back at your own centres, your first 6 learners in the year, do a full sample. This is around the red risk, so centre A. All assessments for the first 6 learners. That will give you a very good insight into how well everything's working. If everything's working well, you can then adapt your strategy, tailor it back, maybe go to 50% for the next half a dozen learners. If you identify risks, you might want to keep it at 100% for another 3 learners, and then again review and see how well it's going. And then an amber risk example, again, just a suggestion. It's your assessment, your assessments and your IQA strategy. So in this instance, we're suggesting just the first couple of learners 100%. If there are no issues, then just 90% and then down to 50%. Continually reviewing it through feedback to assessors and your standardization meetings. If you pick up any issues, you can then start to increase it again. So it's ever evolving, these things, and constant review with gas particularly we always advise, because you can be running everything very well and then someone makes an error they don't realize and they continue with that error. A good IQA strategy will always identify if there are problems. So as an EQA, when I go into centres, if I found a problem but the IQA had found it and they corrected it, that's good practice of quality assurance, because it's showing you the system works. It's much more worrying when there's not a lot of IQA going ahead, yet there are still issues. It means that the IQA isn't picking up any problems and the assessor isn't, and those problems are continuing. So that is normally demonstrating that the IQA system isn't effective. So a lot of generalizations learn, broad statements, but it's just really as a little activity, because when you're preparing for an EQA visit, we want you to be as informed and having a good amount of IQA documentation that you're meeting the requirements and you're flying through these visits. So a very broad general slide here. Type of documents an EQA would expect to see as part of IGEM. Induction process, teaching and learning material, learning plans, schemes of work, types of training methods. Little tip there is things relating to training, and look at the IGEM document for all the information on that. The types of documents an EQA would expect to see as part of the EQA activity. So the sampling plans is the one everyone thinks about, but that's only one part of IQA. There's assessor inductions, the assessor qualifications, your strategy, and the risk rating. Any information on third-party providers, because again that increased risks, your observation, documentation, and your standardization minutes. No, they're not exhaustive lists. There's probably a lot more besides those, but just to give you an idea of the type of things. Again, my feedback as an experience as an EQA, I would often go out and see good sampling plans, very often good assessments, but a lot of the other documentation was lacking. And even though there may not be a problem then, is if you don't have everything else in place, you're more likely to make an error and not find it. So that would be quite worrying. So even though things are going well, again, just a warning about complacency, please consider all the other parts of IQA, because your EQA will be asking for those documents when they come in. Okay, so that was hopefully a helpful section on IQA and a bit of a refresher for those who carry it out already, or some new information for assessors, because they're the ones who'll be getting IQA'd. Just a few slides now on the work log. We're often asked about the work log, and this all comes from the common assessment strategy. So the rules and requirements on on-site assessments for qualifications leading to gas safe registration all come from that common assessment strategy and are the same for all awarding organisations. So regardless of which qualification provider you use, your requirements of on-site will always remain the same. What we've done is created an on-site logbook just to support you as providers and the learners. And we've gone through all the requirements of the qualification and matters of gas training and all the assessment criteria, and we've built them into a logbook. This helps providers because you're not having to do mass referencing back to the handbook and the criteria. We know it's been done. So as you work through this, if all the sections are complete, we know you've met the requirements of the qualification. But if you're doing the EPA, the work logs are part of that endpoint assessment as well. So it's an extra motivation for the learners to do a very good job, because if you do a great job of this, you're more likely to score higher in your EPA. So it's a way of kind of helping those learners already get a step up in the endpoint assessment. So there's an extra carrot, I think, than what we've had previously. So on screen here, quite like this at a glance. I haven't read through it as such, but at a glance, you can see there's some good information in there. So record of pipe work installed, 22 mil copper, capillary joints, 6 elbows, and so on. The photographs quite like. You will notice that the candidate is only in one photograph. A question is often, must the candidate be in the photograph? Well, there's no right or wrong. It's just you get various different photographs. Some are more valuable than others. What we hope to do with this logbook or work log is to reduce the amount of photographs we were getting previously, because we were getting from some hundreds of photographs and a lot of them were just duplicates. In this one, you can see the learner in the first one, and in the second photograph, you can see the completed pipework, and you can see pretty much that it's from the same house. So you're fairly confident when you look at that second photograph, because it's got a good description as well, that it's the same person, the same activity. So photographs are there to support those write-ups and those descriptions and those assessments. They're not the assessment on their own, they're there as part of the whole package. So there's just a couple of photographs that I think work quite well in that instance. Further on, this is another sample. I quite like this, again at a glance, because you can see the candidate's taken a lot of care. They've put their own little lines in between to make sure that they've kept the writing neat. They've got some good information in there. I like the materials list. If you read through that, it's quite well thought out around the job and the tasks that they've done. And again, a couple of good photographs, showing the type of activities that they're doing. If I was being overcritical, I'd say I'd want one with the learner carrying out the activity. It looks as though, I think on the second photograph, are they prepping the boiler there? So if we read the description, it may support what they're doing. So moving on, again, some further, this one's a service record. The important thing with these is we didn't want long write-ups as we've seen before. So by creating a logbook where we're putting in the actual figures, and there's some yes, no's and small boxes to fill it in, it's not burdensome for the assessor or the learner to complete these things. But you can really tell whether the depth of the content and the activity by looking at this. It's a service, and you can get that information from this document. It gives you just as much information as a write-up would, I would argue, and possibly even better, because you're ensuring you get figures and information against things like the gas rate, heat input, and so on. Again, just some more examples of photographs, some with the learner on, some without. I quite like these because they've got good descriptions. A poor example would have no description or very basic description. I think the description really adds a value to the photograph, because it's explaining from that learner what's happening in that photograph. If there's barely any description, you think, well, what is it? It's just you stood in front of something. There's no description of what's happening on that task. So, my top tip here is the description is just as important as the photograph, because that supports it. Now, here's another example of being quite basic in the evidence. So if we look at record of pipe work installed, inclusive of types, materials, sizes, jointing methods, associated works, we've just got 22 pipe and then elbows. So that's barely any information to go from at all. And the description of work carried out, again, just at a glance, you can tell it's very, very basic. It doesn't include enough depth for you to make a judgment initially as an assessor, and then secondly, when they go to their EPA, if that's a purpose eventually, there's not a lot of information for the assessor to go from. So this would be quite a basic example. It depends on how the other evidence looks, would depend on how we would accept this as an assessor. It may just cross that line if the rest of the evidence is very strong, but I'm dubious looking at that, as no doubt you will be yourselves. Again, just some more ideas of what you're looking for. Pipe sizing, so the information's in there. The risk assessment looks quite good. It's been typed out on this occasion, looks quite detailed, so it's a good example. This evidence is really liked by our assessors and often encouraged, because this is the actual supporting evidence learners can provide from the job. So it's hard to argue. They've got dates on, they've got the figures on, and these are official documents. So we're always encouraging providers to speak to learners and ask them to add in these details for those jobs that they're doing. So that's enough from me for now. I'm going to hand you over to my colleague Andy Derber, who'll take you through the next few slides. Hi, Andy.
Morning, everyone. Nice to be with you. My first webinar, so please excuse any delays and faux pas as I'm going through. Just to explain, we're obviously responsible for providing all the ACS aligned materials in the City Guilds qualifications. All the current qualifications, the 9074, the 6189, and the 9189. All contain individual assessment packs, and you can see the 3 packs that exist on the screen now. Part 1 of the assessor's pack, that contains all the practical documentation that the centres need, such as route plans, example route plans. Pack 2, and it also contains the guidance on how to complete the ISAs. Pack 2 is all the written papers for the centres to print out, and pack 3 is the pack that generally is the information that's needed for each candidate. So really it's only pack 3 that you need to repeatedly print out once you've printed your sets out. For the older qualification, the 6014, because there was so many pathways in that, and there was that many different ISAs, which is one of the reasons why the ISAs aren't all sequentially numbered. There's probably about 22 in total, and not everyone applies to each qualification. So from that, on the 6014, they're all actually uploaded individually, so you have to go online and download each one separately. As I've said, we're responsible for issuing those documents, or issuing the passwords to gain access to those documents. So there's a password application form on the City Guilds website if you haven't already got it. Got the passwords. If you download that and send that through to the email address on there, what we do is we verify your approval status with City Guilds, and once we've got that, we then issue the passwords. Now, just so everybody's aware, the passwords only go to one named individual at each centre, and we keep a track of who's got that and when it was issued to them. If obviously staff change, if it is that staff change, then please feel free to resend us the application, but explain why you're asking for it again if somebody previously has had it, because otherwise you'll get the standard response that just says your centre's already received the passwords, go to this person. So if you just start as you mean to go on and tell us that it's because John Smith's left, then that's absolutely fine. So next slide, Dave, please. So as I've said, there's in each of the packs there are multiple ISAs. Now with the 9189 and the 6189, every ISA in the pack has to be completed because there's only one pathway. When you come to the 9074, there are different ISAs relevant to different pathways. And this is exactly the same for the knowledge and understanding question papers. So in the knowledge booklet, you'll get a similar table to this. And what it does is it highlights which ISA is relevant to which pathway, whether you're doing pathway A to E. You've got the version number column. The version number column is the version that you should be working on. And now you don't have to go back if you use the version that is current at the time of the assessment. There's no need to go back, because the idea being that these are assessments at a point in time, but unlike ACS, you're on a qualification. So you constantly reassess throughout the process. So there's no need to go back and redo ISA 1 because, say, UP 1B and tightness testing's changed. You're on a qualification, so throughout the qualification, you will be constantly being reassessed on the core gas safety elements, such as tightness testing. The other thing to mention on the version numbers is you'll notice in the table, all of them are just 6.0, 4.0, so they're a 0.0. You may find throughout the packs that you'll find some documents, say on ISA 1, are at 6.1, are at 6.2, or at 6.3. That's absolutely fine. If it's in the 6 series, then they are current documents. all that will have happened if it's changed, say, from 6.1 to 6.2, there will have been a change that doesn't affect the assessment outcome. So it might have been a typographical mistake, rewording of criteria, but the outcome from that criteria remains the same. So there's no need to go and suddenly, if you've printed 50 copies of version 6.2 and we suddenly send out a 6.3, there's no need to bin everything you've done and redo it, because obviously we know the burden on centres and what's involved, which is the other reason when EU Skills update the assessment criteria every year, sometimes, and I'll pick for example this year, they only added 4 criteria, which would have meant adding 4 or 5 criteria, which would have meant adding 4 or 5 questions to the multi-choice question papers. But that would have gone across 4 papers. So that would have involved every centre reprinting all their question papers multiple times for however many copies you've got for the sake of 4 or 5 new multi-choice question papers. So what we have a tendency to do is to remove that burden, is to just produce a supplementary paper. So and the current one is supplementary 2023. This slide was done when we started these network events last year. So the current supplementary paper for ISA 1 is supplementary paper 2023. Now, that paper will eventually disappear when there is a more major update to the knowledge and understanding. And it was just introduced really to remove the burden from centres from printing loads of pieces of paper out for the sake of it when there was just 4 or 5 questions changed. So next slide, Dave, please. And then, as I've said, you've got a list there as well to just re-emphasise which ISA is relevant to which pathway. And there's again the exact same table in the knowledge and understanding papers that just picks the papers. As I've said already, please don't think your ISA's missing if you go into the pack and there's number 7's missing or something like that. The ISAs have been developed over probably nearly 20 years now, and to save renumbering and having different versions and different numbers in different packs, the numberings remain the same throughout. Some of the ISAs have been withdrawn and aren't used anymore, but some of the ISAs, like on the 6014, I think there's 18 ISAs and 22 question papers. So please don't think the ones you've got any missing. The ones in the pack are the right ones for the assessments that you're actually delivering. And so you're aware as well, the packs are different. So if you download the 9189 pack, it will have different assessments in to the 9074. And that we've seen certainly on some of the network events where some centres have just downloaded one and they've ended up missing ISAs or missing question papers that were in the qualification that they should have been doing. So next slide, Dave, please. So we looked at one of the things in the packs is the route plans. What you'll have in the packs, these are very important for your assessors, for your IQAs, and for the EQA as well. What you've got in the packs is there are template ones. Now the template ones, or the model ones, should I say, are filled in with green text and red text. And then you've got your own ones to physically fill in yourselves. And these can change, obviously, as you change equipment and you change appliances as things break. Then just fill in a new one, but retain the old ones, because the EQAs are going to be requesting these when they internally check the paperwork. Because unlike ACS, we have no involvement in the day-to-day operation of the qualifications. So we've had centres ask, how do we send these to you? Well, they're not for us. Our only involvement in the qualifications is actually issuing the passwords and developing the ACS-aligned elements. We're not involved in the approvals. You don't need to be approved by us. The only time we will get involved is if you've got an inquiry and it comes through to me for answering, which is not a problem, or if you suddenly decide to join us to become an ACS centre, so you're using consistent paperwork. So again, if we really look at the route plans, all the green text is centre specific. Any of the red text, what that is that is a mandatory requirement in ACS. So, or one of the actual given tasks or one of the given faults that have to be picked up. What I would say when you're filling these in is use a little bit of common sense on when you're calculating air vents, and give yourself a short band of allowance for candidate errors in, well, not so much errors, candidates discrepancies in measuring. If you've got a terracotta air vent, you might get one candidate decide that the squares are 9mm, and you might get one candidate deciding the 9.5. Realistically, they're within tolerances of working on site, so give yourselves a little bit of a range. So you can see on there the calculations for the air vent areas have got 98 to 112. It's about being sensible with that. So your IQA and your EQA isn't going to be expecting you to see 50 to 150 in there. They're going to be seeing what could be an acceptable tolerance on site. So next slide, Dave, please. We then look at the PAWS workbooks. And what you've got is there is a domestic appliances or an appliances PAWS workbook that's in addition to the main one in ISA 1. Now, this PAWS workbook covers all the appliances and all the defects in the appliances. So it doesn't matter which ISA, they're trying to be written generically. Now, the important thing to emphasise with this, because we've been asked this several times, why are you asking questions on warm air? Is not every question in that book has to be done on every qualification. It's only the questions that are relevant to the individual ISA. So if we go to the next one, Dave, what you'll see on the ISA question papers is an area for you to fill in which questions you're doing on which route. And as you can see on the EV column, on the evidence column, that for each fault that's actually listed that has to be covered, and I'll pick ISA 5, I think there's 6 or 7 various faults. If you try to put all those faults on the appliances, then the learner might just say, well, the appliance's got that many defects, it really needs replacing, and it makes the assessment unrealistic. So the assessment requires at least 3 defects to be covered practically. This then allows you to cover the separate faults by the PAWS workbook. So you can document them on the top of the paper. For the candidate doing Route A, he's doing questions 1, 4, 7, 11 and 12. But actually he's going to cover the practical faults, or they're going to cover the practical on tasks 1, 2 and 3. And as long as they've covered 3 practically, it makes it more realistic without them doing every fault on the appliances themselves. But they also don't have to answer every question because of that. The questions are also written generically because the faults are generic. So for example, there we've got unsatisfactory ignition, unstable flame picture. Well, you can see on this ISA the learners answered the unsatisfactory ignition question, and it might be they're doing a different ISA that's also got the unsatisfactory ignition question. And that's why there's a single answer sheet. There's no need for them to keep answering the same question several times each time they've done the ISA. If they've already answered the unsatisfactory ignition ISA PAWS question, then they've done it. They don't need to do it if, let's say, they do ISA 7 and that is required for ISA 7. So the other thing to emphasise on that, and this is something I look at as an EQA and an EQA to highlight speed ticking, I would say, more than anything, is in all the boxes where the defects are, that's how I would expect it to look. Not every box ticked, because if every box is ticked, you're suggesting, for example, on unsatisfactory ignition, you've done it on task 1, task 2, task 3, and you've written the question. And in reality, you haven't. You're ticking the ones where you expect the evidence to be on the job sheet. So next slide, Dave, please. Right, now if we have a look at the workshop, and this is just a sample workshop layout for ISA 1. It does cover all the ISAs, but it's predominantly ISA 1 I'm looking at here. So you can see in the bay, we've got a cooker with a fold down lid, a meter, an open flue boiler, and a flueless appliance. Now, obviously, this is an example workshop. Some of you will be with different certification bodies. You'll do your ISAs in your ACS centre, and it might be that if you're approved with one of the other CBs, you haven't got all those appliances in one bay. Well, that's absolutely fine. You don't need to redevelop your workshop just to cover the ISAs. I was talking to a centre the other day, and they've got the oak flue boiler in one bay and the gas cooker in another bay. And how do we do it? Have we got to move the cooker? And I just said, well, no. If you're doing ISA 1, it's basically a tightness test, relight a cooker, and relight a boiler. Then all you need to do, let's say, do the tightness test in the bay with the cooker with the fold down lid. That picks up the criteria to lift the lid up as well. So you do those two parts of the task, and then just move the learner into another bay to do the relight on a boiler. And again, you wouldn't need to repeat the tightness test, they'd just do the relight of the boiler. And that covers all the individual parts of ISA 1. The important thing, though, is that your route plans reflect that you're doing this. So that if you are moving people between two bays on ISA 1, just put on the route plan, they work in bay 1 and bay 3, let's say. And the EQAs and the IQAs, the EQAs in particular will be expecting to walk around an assessment centre with an assessor and an IQA, and then to be able to talk them through how would you deliver ISA 1. So your route plans are going to be your guide to that. This is how you're going to deliver it. I'm going to take them from that bay to that bay, but it's important that you're all aware, if you're the assessor that does this, of how you're doing it, because your EQAs are going to be expecting you to walk through the delivery of a sample of the ISAs that you're doing. Now, obviously, all the criteria is very prescriptive. So what we've got to do is create some variation, if we can, in these what look like on a piece of paper two identical bays. So if we just look at a couple of photos of one of these bays, if we click on Dave, please. Just thinking about it. There we go. So if we just picked these two bays, for example, laid out very similar. But if you look at the left-hand bay, and we'll take the boiler first, one of the criteria that we've put into ISA 1 is that there's a fault with flue bends in ISA 1. Now you can see the left-hand bay, we've got 245s within 600 mil, which is the flue defect in that bay. But if we look in the right-hand bay, same type open flue boiler, but this time we've got 290s, well above the 600 mil. So creating some variation. When we look at the ventilation as well, if you look at the left-hand bay, we've got the small terracotta at the top. The right-hand bay's got the large terracotta for measuring. And what you can't see in both bays, one of them has a fly screen on the upper vent, and the other one has a closable vent on the lower vent. So again, we're trying our best to reduce some predictability from learners talking to each other. Oh, you're going to go and get 245s within 600 mil, because there is some unpredictability. You move on to the gas cooker then. If you look on the left-hand picture, where it's slightly below a worktop and there's burning on the worktop, there's your at-risk faults in that bay. If you look at the brown cooker in the other bay, then what that is, and you obviously can't see it in the picture, that's got one of the legs missing, and so it's unstable. So there's your at-risk fault in that. And all this is about reducing the predictability. It's exactly the same when you come to the likes of the pipework boards. We've got very prescriptive faults laid down in the ACS provisions documents, but too close to electrics, for example, you may in one bay put it within 25 millimeters of the cable, but in another bay you might put it within 150 millimeter of a consumer unit or a piece of electrical switchgear. Again, you're creating slight variation just to reduce as best we can the predictability. So next slide, Dave, please. So my final slide, just looking at the written papers. And again, I emphasize the fact this is all done in the spirit of ACS, but it isn't ACS. So there are slight different requirements. On this, it's the same with the ICEs, and it's the same with the knowledge papers. It's all about the learner being ready for the assessment before they do it. On ACS, they come in, they do the assessment on the day they plan to come in, they pay the money and take the chance on the day, for want of a better word. With a qualification, they're meant to be doing the ICEs in question papers when they are ready for the assessment. Now, I'll add to that, there is no fixed time in the assessment and the qualification where they have to do these ICEs and question papers. They can be done at any time throughout the block, throughout the qualification. That's at the centres. That was slightly different in older qualifications, those that have been delivering these back in the days of the 6012. Corgi, when they were the registration body, had quite strict rules on when they had to be done. EU Skills and Gas Safe have been a lot more relaxed on when they're done, because it's a qualification and the assessment process is ongoing through a qualification, not just at one fixed point in time. So it's about, and I'll pick the ICEs. Some centres like to do it at the end of a block of learning. So when they've done all the basic gas safety training, they'll do the ICE before they let them out into the workplace. That way they know what they're doing before they go into the workplace. Some centres still like to do it as a summative assessment and do it at the end of the qualification. But that is entirely up to you. So we go back to this written paper. On the first attempt, if they get 100%, so it's 100% pass mark for everything. If they get 100%, they passed. Anything less than a second 100%, they have a second attempt on a separate, fresh learner's answer sheet. I like to see those on a different colour, but there is no mandatory requirement for that. The different colour, just as an IQA and as an EQA, makes it easy for me to see that they've had multiple attempts. On the second attempt, again, 100% is the pass. Greater than 80 but less than 100, they can go on to doing the third attempt, the oral questioning. But if they've got less than 100%, less than 80%, they require more training. And this comes back to that, they should be ready for assessment before they do the assessment. So they weren't ready if they've got less than 80% the second time. It's a qualification. So unlike I know happens in ACS, the following or the following afternoon or that very afternoon, they go back and do multiple 4th, 5th, 6th attempts that get allowed in ACS. In a qualification, they've got to have a 48-hour gap to allow them to go and do further training or do further learning, however they choose to do it. And that's exactly the same with an ICE. If a learner fails or refers on an ICE, so they fail to complete a task completely, and they have to wait 48 hours before they come back and redo that task as well. It's not about just giving them until they pass. It's about the learner being ready for assessment, and if they aren't ready, they have the further opportunity to go back and do further learning. And again, last one is the oral questioning, 100% pass, less than 100% to refer. And again, we wouldn't expect as EQAs and IQAs to be seeing this happening, because what that would be saying to me is learners are being put in for the assessments before they're actually ready. And that's me done, Dave.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Andy. We do have a few questions, but we've just got a few slides left. So hopefully what I'll do is try and get through the rest of the slides, and then we can open it up for even more questions. So if you think of any questions, please do start typing them out now, and I can put them all to Andy. I'll try and answer them myself at the end. So just a few slides, there's not many left, but digital credentials. I'm not sure how many of you are aware that we have a lot of digital credentials for our qualifications. So these are a small digital badge which can be shared with the learner. It's free. There's no additional cost for centres delivering these qualifications. You simply put the learner's email address in when you're making the claim, and you can issue a digital credential. So you can see from the pathway here that they meet the requirements. The organisation issues it, the individual accepts and shares the credential, and that can be shared on social media, LinkedIn, or various other sources. And this is how they look. So if you look at the right hand side, we have digital credentials for our gas engineering and our different pathways, and it shows what they're aligned to. The digital, they can be shared, as it says there, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. It's real on-time online verification, so that it has the data within that credential. If you're not using these, it does seem a shame, because the learners do love this type of thing. They're becoming increasingly more popular, and it's something that we offer, so it seems a shame that we're not using more of these. So on this slide you can see we have a number of videos. They're all hyperlinked, and it'll show you how you can claim those through the walled garden. So your exams teams may be aware of this, but delivery staff may not realise we have a lot of these against our qualifications. So there's a couple of email addresses there as well. So the DC service team and the digital support team, please do try to email those. Tell them that you've been along to this webinar and you'd like to learn a little bit more about some of the credentials that you can offer your learners. So some general updates. Keep an eye out for our newsletters. There's a new one this spring. If you're not aware of those, we do have a back catalogue on our website, and I've put a link on this slide. So if you've downloaded the presentation, you can go direct to those. And there's the email updates. Still speak to plenty of members of staff who aren't aware that we have an update system. This is our primary method of updating you on all our changes, all our sessions that we're running, any changes to assessment, particularly the gas, through Andy will share information with us that we put out on email updates. If you're not signed up, you'll be missing out on quite a lot. The 3345 is our version of Water Eggs and Unvented. There are some links to the Unvented in Pathway D, and it's an elective unit in other pathways with the 9074. But also, learners who've achieved the 9189 or 6189 in the past can, or you as a provider can apply for a certificate for those learners. It also works well with e-certificates, so they're free as well. It can be downloaded. But if you've had any learners last year who achieved those qualifications and you want to apply for an additional certificate for them, there's no extra assessment, that can be done. And as I just mentioned before, these actually carry digital credentials. So you can see on the screen there, those actual digital credentials with the titling. So very often when people are on site and they're being asked for these things, digital credentials are a brilliant way of sharing what that learner has done with a clerk of works, a line manager out in industry, or any inspector who may be asking. And that can be shared with those people who can then click on them and see the information behind them. So again, this will be free for learners who have achieved that qualification. You just need to upload email addresses, and learners who have achieved those qualifications before can be issued with these. So support material. Most of our textbooks, particularly on the plumbing, are issued through Hodder Education. They have e-books as well, which they call eBoost. There's a lot of very good information in those textbooks. So if you want any extra support on that, please let us know. We'll share links. If you want inspection copies, please go to HODA Education. If you just Google HODA Education, the website will come up. There is a contact us section and it's regional. If you contact them and if you tell them you've been to this webinar and you've seen those books and you'd like to see some inspection copies, they will usually send you some free copies. So please follow that up. All our videos we've run before are on this single channel. So you only need that one link. You can save the link. Any new video or webinar we run will be found on that same link. We also have colour logbooks and training manuals and various other support materials. This one is particularly interesting around the Corgi direct books. So if you're running either of these qualifications, there's a direct link there. The only way you can find this information is through that link. It's not searchable through Google or a search on the internet. You have to go in through this link and it will automatically take you to the different qualifications. If you click on those, you can purchase with 20% off the books relating to those pathways. So there's a little video there you can follow up on, and if you've downloaded this presentation, you'll have that direct link so you can go direct to that support material. Here's a slide with a direct link to contact us for HODA Education and Gemma Simpson, who supports us with BSE and the textbooks. And all these relate to more predominantly the plumbing, and this is predominantly the gas today, but many of you will be offering courses across this industry. There's the two on the left there are quite interesting because they're relating to the 8202 and the revision notes, and they've been very, very popular. I'm still not sure if everyone's aware that they exist. So if you're running those courses, it's worth getting in contact with HODA and trying to get some inspection copies. So endpoint assessment, as you saw on the previous screen, we've run webinars directly on that, and I've put a link there. So we're not going to go through all the EPA, there's lots of parts to it, but there's a direct link there, and there's another at the bottom here, EPA guidance video, talking you through all the stages of the gas EPA. So if you want to know more about that, please go to that video and contact the EPA partnership managers. They're very, very helpful, very supportive staff. They can talk you through EPA Pro, where to find information, how to access it, how to make the bookings, all that side of things they can support you with. Preparing to offer the apprenticeship, the EPA, please look at the video. Any questions, please come back to ourselves. So that was the last but one slide. Just a shout out really to sign up for those alerts and to follow us on LinkedIn. So hopefully you will be registered for those, or you will now register for them. And it just remains now to take your questions. So what I'll do, Andy, is I will open up the questions tab and work through these. So I think most of them are for yourself. Hi Andy, is it mandatory? Yeah, prepare yourself. Is it mandatory for the centre to have fixed mechanical extraction? So ventilation, I think, extraction.
Yeah, I've seen this one. Now, there is nothing written down anywhere that says how a workshop has to be built or how it has to be designed. Obviously, it's entirely up to the centre how they do it, but what they should have is the associated risk assessments to determine that when they operate the equipment in the workshops, they're all safe. So if you've got a small, tiny workshop that's 8 meters by 4 meters, let's say, and the ceiling height of 2.5 meters, then you might be looking for fixed extraction in every bay. But then if you've got a workshop that's 300 meters by 300 meters and a 25 meter ceiling, it might have a different type of extraction system. I know there are some workshops I've been in that have got a central extraction system that does the entire workshop. Some have got individual extraction in bays. It's up to the centre how they design it and present the risk assessments for how it's operated. So hopefully that helps Grant with that one.
Thank you very much. The next question is gas work log, page 133, appendix 1, fault finding. Assume this not required to be filled in by the student. I'd have to open up the logbook, and I've got the presentation on screen in this webinar software. to be sure, but I suspect if it's Appendix 1, what we normally do there is we put in extra copies of the pages. So if anyone needs to print off an extra copy, a learner may mess it up or may lose something, there's extra sheets in the appendix. So I suspect that is what it is, but I'd have to open it up to be 100% sure. But yeah, I suspect it's just if it's the appendix, it's just extra copies, so you won't have to use them if you need them. The next question I shared with Andy yesterday, and I've had a chance to respond to the person asking it, so apologies, but it should be fresh in your mind, Andy.
Yeah.
When are the assessments going to reflect the changes for industry, such as domestic working pressures 18.5 millibar to 23? What would you like training and assessing staff to do in the meantime?
Right, yeah, luckily I had seen this one before. Now, the only place I could actually find this reference that, as it stands at present, is one of the question papers. Now, it's important to emphasise that the industry hasn't changed to it being a blanket 18.5 to 23 millibar. If you're doing, which the one question that's written is orientated around the requirements of BS 6400. BS 6400 has not changed. BS 6400 is still 19 to 23 millibar. The checks in IGEM G13 are for a different activity than how the checks are done in BS 6400. And I know because I got the draft a couple of days ago that I haven't had a chance to look at. I know IGEM are currently issuing amendments to G13 to highlight where it's applicable and the differences between that and BS 6400. So as it stands at present, the question's written around BS 6400, so will remain at 19 to 23. How centres choose to deliver the changes to G13, that's entirely up to them. And the interpretation between G13 and BS 6400, I'm led to believe from talking to metering organisations that 6400 is unlikely to move from what it currently says. But like I said, G13 is being amended to suit. Now, if there is somewhere else that I've missed this 19 to 23 is referenced, I did try and have a look yesterday, but there's a lot of ISAs, there's a lot of question papers, and so if you want to let me know if there's a specific area you're looking at, that's fine.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Yeah, that's a useful feedback, really, because with so many assessments and best intentions, we keep them all up to date and refreshed. But if you spot something that we've missed, really helpful if you get in contact and just point us in the right direction if we've missed something, and then we can correct it ASAP. So yeah, let's all work together on that and keep things as updated as we can. The next question is probably one for me. Can you please tell me if there's any plans to release a digital portfolio for the 9074? Are there any plans for a City Guilds book for the 9074? Currently, no, there's no plans for a digital logbook. We have the version that we share online. If you want any of the direct copies of that, please email us and you can sign for some editable Word versions. But many people use e-portfolios of different kinds, and the demand isn't necessarily there for the amount of work it would take. And with these being updated fairly frequently, it's an ongoing task. So at this moment in time, there's no plans. As regards a book, it would be down to Hodder Education. So they are the publishers. So if they saw value in creating a book and felt there were enough people would purchase it, I'm sure they would create one. But for now, we've got the smart screen support for it. We have a learner training manual, which is very good, and get some great feedback on that. So we can access that. If you don't have that, please email us or put it in the feedback when you do the survey, and we can follow it up. I realise we've run over time, so sorry about that. If people have to dash, we understand, but we'll stay on as long as we need to answer any questions. So we're happy to run over.
Can I just answer that one, Dave? On the Corgi books, So obviously the Corgi books support the 9074.
Oh yeah, sorry, yeah.
And the smart screen's been done. And just so people are aware, the Corgi books, actually, we are the technical authors for the Corgi books. So if there are any changes, for example, the recent edition of the Essential Gas Safety has been modified and now includes all the information for the additional pause questions, for example, that have just gone in. So I think possibly that's why Hodder haven't bothered us. There's that many different ones on the market, but we reference the Corgi ones, and because we are the authors of the Corgi ones as well, we know what to put in them when the qualifications change.
Thanks, Andy. The next one, just to confirm, students who complete 905 will automatically receive what regs invented. No, not automatically. You need to claim it. So if you look in the appendix, and on that slide it had the page number, it will explain you've still got to register the learner. There's no extra assessment, but you have to register and then claim the certificate. And then if you put the email address in, you'll also receive a digital credential. So there's no additional assessment, but it's not automatic. It's the centre who have to make the claim. So I'll just put that in, needs claiming. So quite a brief typed response. Next one is interesting. Do all apprentices have to pass an endpoint assessment before they can be registered with Gas Safe? Well, if they're on the gas engineering apprenticeship, it is different than if they're on the 9189 plumbing and heating apprenticeship with Gas Pathway. So often this is where the confusion comes from, because there are different rules for different apprenticeships. So if we're talking about the gas engineering apprenticeship, you have to be Gas Safe registered to pass the EPA. Therefore, it comes before. When a learner completes the 9074 qualification, we send an update list to Gas Safe that informs them that that learner is eligible to join. So they go on a list of eligibility. It is then for that learner or employer to make the application to be Gas Safe registered. If you are running the plumbing and heating apprenticeship with Gas Pathway, the learner will complete the 9189, but the rules of the apprenticeship are we're not allowed to upload that learner to the eligibility list for Gas Safe until they've successfully completed the EPA. So in that case, a learner has to pass the EPA before we send the update list to the Gas Safe register. So it does depend on which apprenticeship that learner is on. So I don't know if you can type away which apprenticeships you're running. Many centres are running both and therefore have different rules for both. These rules aren't set by the awarding organisations, they're set by the employer groups when they create the apprenticeship. So it's not something we can alter or control. So you've got people on both, okay? So those rules are different depending on which learners, on which pathway they're on. Will City Guilds be producing specific gas teaching resources for the 995 gas? As there currently nothing available on Smart Screen for Phase 4 delivery. Our Smart Screen is for the 9189 is a core only, and there's no plans to extend that at this moment in time. We do have, though, Smart Screen support for the 9074, so many centres use that. The gas training's the same, it just won't have 9189 on the top. So many centres will access some of that material and the Corgi books and so on. Again, if you're looking for support with that, do you know who your business manager is? If not, contact myself or Rob Malander. And direct sales is another really good email address. So if you're looking for any support with Smart Screen or anything like that, direct sales at cityguilds.com. And if you have a business manager and you don't know who that is, they'll put you in contact with them. But if you're struggling with that, please let us know. Again, on specific revision materials for the 9074, we've got Smart Screen. Regarding the EPA, if you're on EPA Pro, preparing learners for the endpoint assessment, in EPA Pro, there's additional support material predominantly relating to the endpoint assessment. So if you're looking at endpoint assessment on the gas engineering, that support comes through EPA Pro, and my advice would be to contact the EPA Partnership Manager. Your centres probably have access to EPA Pro, even if you don't, and that material, I speak to many centres where material, particularly on the plumbing and heating, there's a lot of very good material there, and it's not always being accessed by the centres because they're not always aware. So I mean, this session wasn't about EPA Pro or EPA, but we're happy to try and point in the right direction, and we can pick some of this up after today if we're not answering this in enough depth. With a level 3 gas engineering apprentice, if a learner fails part of the EPA and will not resit, does this affect gas safe registration? No, because the gas safe registration for a level 3 gas engineering is related to the qualification, not the EPA. So, do City Guilds produce a plan for assessment bays or just CB? Sorry, I'm not sure what CB is. Maybe it's me not picking up on that. But in terms of the on program, Andy shared some samples of bays in the presentation. In terms of the EPA, we give samples on those videos. We also have a resource checklist that we've got for the plumbing one at the moment. We're looking to develop something similar for gas, but the difference with the gas is in the EPA pack, there's a sample bay layout. It's already in that pack. So if you don't have access to that, again, please contact us after today. Put it in the survey. You know, the type of things you want follow-up information on. May not be able to go into some of these things in detail now, but these are the type of things we can follow up with this webinar and give you some further information. But the EPA pack for gas engineering has a sample bay layout. You can look to prepare those, and if you want to take some photographs and send those in to us, myself and Rob Malander, we'll take a look at those for you and give you some advice if that helps.
I think, Dave, the comment on the do City Guilds produce a plan for assessments or just a CB, that's the template workshop plan that we've done.
Right, okay. Thanks.
Yeah, so I think if anybody we've already created a template workshop plan, so you don't need to go to a CB to do that. If you contact Dave or Rob, who are on the front, they've both got access to a password protected workshop plan that they'll send you.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. CB's certification body, I suspect. So the on-program part, yeah, you shared some photographs, and we have a more detailed one, which is on request only with a password, but we can share that if you want some extra information on that. But it's, you know, it's similar to what you expect, and we've delivered for years, and it's very similar to ACS. Is in ISA and the pause papers, there seems to be more focus on open flues, but little on modern appliances, zero governors. I know there have been updates, supplementary questions, but are there any plans to update the questions to modern scenarios?
I'll pick that one up, Dave. Unfortunately, the ISAs set a specific set of criteria set by EU skills. And I do have to say, for many years, we've been commenting about open fluid boilers and the like. Unfortunately, we're governed by the ACS criteria, and the ACS criteria is still heavily laid around those requirements. And I think that's why the likes of the gas work log, etc., are there to pick up more of the modern equipment.
Thanks, Andy. I had a question about the presentation. It's in the handout section. So if you look at the column and scroll down, you'll see a tab for handouts. If you click on that, you'll see a copy of this presentation. So if you can download it direct from there, please. Can any member of the team upload the student photo on claims for gas safe? I don't see why not. I think, you know, that's a centre decision. So at your centre, you'll have a process of people who input data for things like exams and uploads. So it's really dependent on your processes internally of who has access and who does those uploads. So you know, whoever that is would be the person to complete it. I don't think we insist on any specific person, just someone who has access and has password and so on. So the questions seem to have dried up. I know there's probably some further information required after today. What I'd suggest, keep on typing your questions. I know we've run over, but we'll stay as long as we can to help answering things. We understand if you've got to dash, you've probably got all busy days, and if you do have to dash, just a big thanks for coming along and joining us in this webinar. It's been hopefully very helpful. We've found the feedback on the questions helpful because it gives us some feedback just naturally from listening to your questions. But please do fill in the survey. It is, I know it can be a pain at times, another survey, but that information is so useful to us. And if there's things that you want extra information on, it's good to drop it in there and let us know. We can build it into future sessions. You've got our email addresses, you've got the EPA Partnership Managers email addresses. Copy us all into those follow-ups. Anything that need for Andy's email address is there, but you know, equally you can come through ourselves and we can forward that. And let's just try and all work together and keep the communication channels going, because often the errors come from people not knowing updates or changes or where things are, and there's often a lot more information available than we realise. Even just through this chat, you know, Andy's reminded me of a couple just as we're chatting. We suffer sometimes from having too much information, but yeah. So, well, it seems to have dried up. Any final questions from anyone, or just some feedback? You know, please use the questions tab just to offer some feedback. Anything you found useful, helpful, anything else we can help with, please let us know. Well, it seems quiet now, Andy. We might have dried up all the questions. So if that's the case, then just once again, thank you very much for your attendance. Big thanks to Andy Derber for coming along, giving up his time to present those slides. It's been really helpful, Andy. Thank you very much for that input and insight. And thank you very much to everyone. Oh, quick one, who to email for Word doc. If you're from the London area, so east of the country would be Rob Mallender. If you're in the west of the country, it would be myself initially. But we both work very closely, so if either of us aren't available, we can always support each other in those regions. So, so yeah, just a final thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day and have a great weekend. Thanks very much, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.